You have no shame. You married my son for his money, and everyone here knows it. My mother-in-law stood up at brunch, pointed her finger right at me, and said that in front of 30 people. Forks dropped. Glasses froze halfway to lips. My husband David looked down at his plate and said nothing. Not a single word. She wanted to destroy me in front of everyone that day. She wanted me to crumble, to cry, to run. But she had no idea what I was holding. She had no idea that the woman she called Shameless was about to teach her what real shame feels like. My name is Corinne. I'm 34 years old. I grew up in a tiny town in North Carolina where my mama cleaned houses for wealthy families just to keep our lights on. I watched her scrub floors and fold other people's laundry with her hands cracked and raw. I told myself I'd build something different. I put myself through community college working double shifts at a diner, and then I earned my degree in interior design. I wasn't born into money. I didn't grow up attending galas or knowing which fork to use for salad. But I worked hard, and I was proud of who I was. Then I married David Wainwright. He came from old Southern money, the kind of family that had their last name on buildings downtown. His mother, Vivian, ran that family like royalty. She decided who was welcome and who wasn't. She decided who mattered and who didn't. And from the moment I walked down the aisle, Vivian made it crystal clear that I was an outsider, a nobody, a charity case her son had taken pity on. For 3 years I swallowed every insult. I smiled through every cruel comment. I kept my head down and my mouth shut. People thought I was weak. They thought I had no fight in me. But I wasn't born into their world. I didn't have a trust fund or a family name anyone recognized. What I had was something far more dangerous. I had eyes that noticed things other people missed, and I had the patience to wait until the right moment. 3 years is a long time to be quiet. You're about to find out why I waited. If you've ever married into a family that made you feel like you didn't belong, no matter how hard you tried, hit that subscribe button. I want to hear your story in the comments. You're not alone in this, and neither was I. Let's go. It was Easter Sunday. Vivian's estate was decorated like something out of a magazine. White lilies everywhere. Crystal glasses polished until they caught the light. About 30 guests filled the long dining table on the back terrace. Extended family, neighbors from the country club, even the pastor and his wife. The smell of honey-glazed ham and fresh bread drifted through the warm spring air. Everything was perfect on the surface. That was how Vivian liked things. Perfect on the surface. I arrived early that morning and offered to help set the table. Vivian looked at me the way you'd look at a stray dog that wandered into your kitchen. "Don't touch the china," she said. "You wouldn't know what to do with it." I pulled my hands back. David leaned over and whispered, "Just let it go, Corinne. Please don't start anything." I wasn't starting anything. I never did. That was the problem. Brunch began, and for a while it was fine. Small talk, laughter, the clink of silverware. Then Vivian stood up and tapped her glass for a toast. She praised David for his work at the family firm. She gushed about her younger daughter, Elise, the prized child, the one they always praised, the one who could do no wrong. Then Vivian turned her eyes to me. The warmth drained from her face. "You have no shame," she said. "You married my son for his money, and everyone here knows it." The table went silent. I could hear birds singing in the garden, completely unaware of the violence happening on that terrace. Vivian wasn't done. "I raised my son to have standards," she continued. "I don't know what happened." A few guests laughed nervously. Others stared at their plates. The pastor's wife looked like she wanted to disappear. I stood up slowly. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I said, "Excuse me," and I walked inside to the guest bathroom. I locked the door and gripped the edge of the sink. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness. It was pure rage. 3 years of swallowed words burning in my throat. I splashed water on my face and took a breath. Then I opened the door and started walking back toward the terrace. That's when I heard it. I was passing Vivian's private study, and the door was cracked open just a few inches. Her voice floated out, but it wasn't the sharp, commanding voice I knew. It was soft, girlish, almost sweet. "I miss you too, baby. Tonight. Same place." I stopped. My feet wouldn't move. Gerald, her husband, was sitting at the dining table outside. He was right there, eating ham and making small talk with the pastor. So who was Vivian talking to like that? I stood frozen in that hallway for maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Then I heard her footsteps coming toward the door, and I moved quickly back down the hall. I returned to the table. I sat down. I smiled. But something inside me had shifted completely. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't just swallowing my pain. I was paying attention. And I was done being the quiet one. 2 weeks after Easter, David sat me down in our living room. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He told me that Vivian had convinced the family to restructure the trust. My name would be removed from any future inheritance. "It's to protect the bloodline," he said, repeating Vivian's words like they were his own. I stared at him. "And you agreed to this?" He sighed. "It's just money, Corinne. Don't make this a thing. Don't make this a thing." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. David would always choose his mother. Every single time. I was married to a man who didn't have the courage to stand beside me. That was the first betrayal that truly cut deep. Not because of the money, but because of what it meant. I was alone in this family. A month later came the second blow. Vivian hosted a charity luncheon at the country club. She invited every woman in their social circle. She invited neighbors. She invited women I'd never even heard of. She did not invite me. When I found out from a friend who mentioned it casually, I called Vivian and asked about it. She responded right in front of a group of women at her next tea gathering. "Oh, honey," she said with that syrupy smile. "I thought you'd be more comfortable at home. These events aren't really your scene, are they?" Elise laughed from across the room. The other women looked away, embarrassed for me but too afraid of Vivian to say a word. I smiled and nodded. But that night, I sat in my car in the driveway and started a notebook. I wrote down the dates and times of Vivian's so-called yoga retreats, her Tuesday salon appointments that lasted 4 hours. The evenings she sent the household staff home early, for no reason. Patterns. I was looking for patterns. Then came the third betrayal, and this one hit my career. At a family dinner, Vivian announced she was hiring an interior designer for the family's vacation home renovation. She looked directly at me when she said it. "We need someone with real credentials, not someone who took a few classes online." The sound of forks scraping plates filled the silence. David said nothing. Elise smirked. My hands clenched under the table so hard my nails left marks in my palms. But I smiled. "Of course, Vivian," I said. "You always know best." That night, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop and emailed 3 potential freelance clients I'd been putting off. I started building my own income in secret. I started creating emotional distance from David. And I kept filling that notebook. Every date, every inconsistency, every lie. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building a case. What they didn't know was that I had already started collecting proof. That phone call at Easter never left my mind. I started watching more carefully, and the pieces fell into place faster than I expected. The gardener's son. His name was Luca, 28 years old. Handsome, quiet, always around the estate when Vivian was home. The other staff members would exchange glances when Vivian called him inside the main house for what she called landscaping consultations. Nobody said anything, They were all too afraid of losing their jobs. But I wasn't staff. And I had nothing left to lose. One afternoon, I was returning a novel I'd borrowed from Vivian's study. I placed the book back on the shelf, and a piece of paper slipped out from between the pages. A handwritten letter. The handwriting was not Vivian's. It was from Luca. The words were intimate, unmistakable. He wrote about our place and the necklace I gave you. It was dated just 3 months earlier. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I pulled out my phone and photographed every word. Then I slid the letter back exactly where I found it. Over the next few weeks, I photographed something else. A pearl bracelet Vivian wore every Tuesday. It was delicate and expensive. Gerald hadn't bought it for her. I checked his credit card statements when he left them on his desk. No jewelry purchases in over 2 years. I created a hidden folder on a secure cloud drive. Photos of the letter. Timestamps of Vivian's absences matched against Luca's work schedule on the estate. Screenshots of Vivian's social media posts about yoga retreats that didn't match any real studio in a 50-mile radius. Every piece of evidence was organized, dated, and backed up. I had a plan they never saw coming, and the woman who called me shameless was about to learn what real shame looked like. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone who understood the family's legal structure, someone who knew where the bodies were buried. That's when I thought of Harold Pemberton. Mr. Pemberton had been the Wainwright family's estate attorney for over 15 years. Then, 2 years ago, Vivian had him quietly removed. She told everyone he'd retired, but a few people knew the truth. Harold had started asking questions about some of Vivian's financial decisions, and she couldn't have that. I found his number through an old family directory. I called him from a parking lot outside a grocery store so no one would overhear. He agreed to meet me at a diner 2 towns over. He was cautious at first. He stirred his coffee and looked at me like he was deciding whether to trust me. Then I slid my phone across the table and showed him everything. The letter, the photos, the timestamps, the bracelet. His face changed. The caution melted away and something else took its place. Recognition. I always knew something was off, he said quietly. She had me removed because I was getting too close to the books. Harold told me something that made my pulse quicken. He'd noticed small amounts being redirected from the family trust before he was let go. Nothing huge, just enough to avoid suspicion. He believed those funds were connected to Vivian's secret life with Luca. Then he told me the most important thing of all. The family trust had a morality clause. Gerald had insisted on it years ago. If any trustee was found to have engaged in conduct that damaged the family's reputation, they could be removed and their share redistributed. Vivian never imagined it would apply to her. Harold agreed to help me document everything properly. Meanwhile, Vivian grew bolder. She told David that I should consider moving out for a while so the family could breathe. She was planning a massive 50th wedding anniversary party for herself and Gerald. 100 guests, a live band, catered food. The whole estate decorated like a palace. In her mind, she had already won. She'd pushed me to the margins, controlled her son, and maintained her perfect image. I nodded along to everything. I even helped with the party planning when she asked. I picked out flowers and confirmed the seating chart. Harold called me the night before the event. "You'll only get one shot at this," he said. "Make it count." I told him, "I know exactly when and where." The estate looked like a dream that evening. White tents with string lights stretched across the garden. Roses climbed every column. A live band played soft jazz near the fountain. Over 100 guests filled the grounds, dressed in their finest, holding champagne glasses and laughing. The smell of gardenias hung thick in the warm evening air. Vivian was radiant. She wore a cream-colored gown and the pearl bracelet on her wrist. She floated through the crowd accepting compliments and kisses on the cheek like she was receiving a coronation. When dinner ended, Vivian took the microphone. She stood in front of the large projection screen the band had been using for a slideshow of old family photos. She delivered a speech about loyalty, about family values, about the sacred bond of marriage. She dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief. The crowd applauded warmly. Then she added one more line, and she looked right at me when she said it. Not everyone understands what it means to truly commit to a family. Some people just attach themselves. A few people glanced at me. I could feel their pity, their discomfort, their silence. I stood up. The room tensed. I could hear the faint click of someone setting down their glass. People expected me to cry. They expected me to leave the way I always did, quietly, with my head down. Instead, I walked calmly to the front of the room. I was holding a small envelope. My hands were steady. My voice was clear. Vivian, I said, you've spent years teaching me about standards, about shame, about what it means to be worthy of this family. So I think it's only fair that everyone here sees the standard you've been setting. I opened the envelope and handed a USB drive to the technician running the projector. The screen behind Vivian lit up. First came the photograph of Luca's handwritten letter, every intimate word visible. Then the time-stamped comparisons, Vivian's claimed locations versus where she actually was. Then the receipts for the pearl bracelet, purchased by Luca from a jeweler 2 towns over. And finally, the last image. A security camera still from the estate's own guest house. Vivian and Luca, together. The gasp that moved through that crowd was the loudest quiet sound I've ever heard. Gerald stood up from his chair. His face was white. Vivian? He whispered. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. This is fabricated, she stammered. She's lying. She's always been jealous of. She couldn't even finish the sentence. Harold Pemberton stepped forward from the crowd. He was wearing a simple gray suit, and he carried a folder under his arm. He addressed Gerald directly. Mr. Wainwright, I've also documented financial irregularities in the family trust. Funds have been redirected to accounts connected to a Mr. Luca Ferris. I have the paperwork here if you'd like to review it. Elise jumped up from her seat. This is ridiculous, Daddy. Don't listen to. Gerald held up his hand. The room went completely silent. He looked at Vivian. His voice was low and broken. 50 years. And you stood up there talking about loyalty. Vivian reached for his arm. He pulled it away from her. I looked out at that room full of people who had watched me be humiliated for 3 years. I spoke one last line. She called me shameless, but I wasn't the one living a double life. I turned and walked toward the garden exit. David caught up with me near the gate. His eyes were red. Corinne, I didn't know, he said. I looked at him for a long moment. You didn't want to know, I said, and that's worse. Gerald invoked the morality clause the following week. Vivian was removed as trustee. Her share of the family trust was redistributed among the remaining members, and Gerald personally insisted that my name be included. He called me to his study and said something I never expected to hear from a Wainwright. You deserved better from all of us. I thanked him. And then I filed for divorce from David. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I sat across from him at our kitchen table one last time and told him the truth. I spent 3 years hoping you'd choose me. You never did. I'm choosing myself now. He didn't argue. I think he knew I was right. I moved into my own apartment that fall. I launched my interior design studio full-time, and business came faster than I expected. Harold Pemberton became my personal attorney and advisor. He told me I reminded him of his daughter. That meant more to me than any trust fund. As for Vivian, her relationship with Luca collapsed under the weight of public scrutiny. She was quietly removed from her charity boards. Her friends stopped calling. The woman who built her entire identity on image lost everything because she couldn't live up to her own standards. She spent years trying to make me feel small. But the smallest person in that family was the one pretending to be the biggest. If you've ever been called names by someone who was guilty of far worse, someone who hid behind their reputation while tearing yours apart, I see you. Subscribe and share your story in the comments. You deserve to be heard, and this community has your back. Every experience you share helps someone else feel less alone. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And remember, your worth is not determined by the people who failed to see it. It's determined by what you do when you finally see it yourself.